So just before we go into the questions session, I would like to conclude this with this beautiful Christmas card. To summarize the whole thing, that was I was interested to share with our public here. So this is a real Christmas card that was sent by Colin Pittendrick to Jürgen Aschhoff, two founders of the human chronobiology. And here what you can see that light is really highlighted as the main time giver, right? And I think you now got a sense of why would that be. And I would also like to thank warmly once again the organizers of this session, Good Light Group, deLIGHTed Academy, Society for Light Treatment and Biological Rhythm, and Lager Research Foundation. And I'm now moving to the, can maybe stop sharing this. And I would like to move now to Q&A. And I actually would like to warmly thank our public, because I saw people arriving and nobody dropped off. So really, thanks a lot for great attendance, and thanks again to both of the speakers. So we have 15 minutes left, and we have really more than a dozen of questions to both speakers. So just once again, please feel free to keep writing your questions in Q&A, because all your questions would be answered either just now in person, or you will receive the email. And please, just to remind you to fill the survey, because it will help us a lot to get the sense of how we can improve further our activities. So let me start with the question to Dr. Reid. So the question is, how do you determine the cutoff for midpoint of sleep at 5 p.m.? Why did you take this as a cutoff?
So great question. I usually have a slide that I took out for this particular talk, but basically it was based on the distribution of data, and also based on prior studies looking at mid-sleep point and what is considered to be late. So in a lot of other studies, it's around 4:30, and in this case, the distribution of the data indicated that 5 a.m. was late sleep.
Great, thank you. So next question for you, also Katie. Real cool study and great talk. How did you measure light again, via the light meter on the actigraphy device or at the level of the eyes?
So that's a really great question. And I think Dr. Harmsen's device that he wore around the neck would potentially be a better way. We actually did it at the wrist. There is obviously limitations with light levels measured at the wrist rather than closer to the eye. But for practicality purposes, that light at the wrist is the data that we had. And I think is indicative of light exposure in general, although with some limitations.
Okay, next question to you, also Katie, great talk. Do you know whether the sleep measures during pregnancy were related to pre-pregnancy sleep? Were it already late types before pregnancy who are more prone to develop gestational diabetes?
That's a really great question that I don't know the answer to. In this study, we only have sleep measures in the first trimester of pregnancy.
Okay, so now perhaps few questions to Frieder, and then I will come back to you, Katie. So Frieder, the first question for you, with respect to the Amsterdam data, would you recommend type 2D patients to have breakfast in dim light? Is that not contradictory to your own results?
Yes, yeah, I had a lot of discussions also with that group about these findings, and actually we see the same thing if we only looked at the breakfast meal. So if we only consider the breakfast time and the breakfast meal, then we actually have a similar effect of that our bright light, so even though it was less bright than in the Amsterdam group study, so their light brightness was 4,000, our was 1,250, and we also saw a tendency for higher glucose values in response to the brighter light in the morning. So there seems to be something about that timing. So there we again see timing matters, and our measurement was really just at the end of daytime, so at 6 p.m. early evening. However, I'm pretty sure that, and that's also one of the things why I tested the natural light is that maybe just a very intense artificial light has a detrimental effect. That's something that we need to test further. However, I can also say if I only look at the mixed meal test and the blood sugar levels that we measured in our study, so we had the mixed meal test at the very last day on Friday, so after being exposed to natural light to 4 days prior to that, there we again also see a tendency for even in the natural light, higher blood sugar levels with the meal. So there is something consistent about the brighter light in the morning that somehow increases blood sugar levels. But I'm not sure then if it's necessarily a bad thing. It could also mean that the starch that is being digested, the carbohydrates that come into the digestion are just being taken up more efficiently. So that induces a higher blood sugar rise, maybe. So that's a speculation that we need to follow up on. So digestion might be improved with lighting. So I'm still hesitant to recommend anyone to have breakfast in dim light. So I'm somehow trying to make sense out of this data, and we need more studies. But there is a consistent effect, as I said, that brighter light in the morning somehow increases your blood sugar response for the breakfast meal.
Okay, thank you very much for that one. So the next question to you, Frieder. Thanks for the great talk. Your participants were seated for much on the days to mimic office work, but did you control for the activity as well as for lights?
Yes, of course we did, because yeah, for blood sugar levels, it's important, of course, on the one hand, to really keep the diet the same, but the more you move, the more your blood sugar will also be in controlled levels. So every kind of movement, of course, burns glucose, burns sugar, and that's why we kept it really the same. And people had standardized times at which they were supposed to stand to do some standing exercise, and we really also measured that with the same device that Kathryn mentioned, so the wrist watch with which you can also measure activity. And there we could see that activity really aligned very nicely, so that cannot explain the findings that we see.
Okay, great, thank you. Another short one for the lux values measured. So how they were measured, were they measured at the eye level or vertical, or how it was done exactly?
Yeah, so it's as recommended. So basically, we set up the spectrometer at the spot where we would otherwise assume that the participant was sitting, and then with the spectrometer vertically facing the view of sight of that participant.
Okay. By the way, to the audience, if the response that you receive is still, if you still have the follow-up question, please don't hesitate to keep writing into Q&A, and you will get your response, if not live, then by email, okay? So I'm back to Katie here. So the next question to you, Katie, is, do you think, or maybe it's to both of you, actually, is there an optimal ratio of light and dark for humans per day? What does this mean for people living far from the equator, where this ratio is constantly changing? So how does this imply, what do you think, for the people who are by the north or south?
That's a great question. I think the data for that is still pending. And I think because we have artificial light as well, it's hard to know whether we're getting natural daylight or whether we're using artificial light, and what the impact of that would be when you change location. And so I don't think there's a good answer to that right now.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So the next question to you, Katie, if room light of 100 lux during sleep is enough to show effects in adults, but what about children? Do you think a night light in children's rooms during sleep affects metabolic health as well?
A lot of questions that I can't answer right now, and which is why I ended my talk, is that there's a lot of work for us still to do. I do think that maybe it depends on the night light. Some of the night lights are quite bright. When I was doing some of these studies, I had small children who would sleep with the light on, and I did have concerns about that. And so, potentially, if it's bright enough, perhaps. But there also is some indication, I also mentioned this when we talk, that there's individual differences in light sensitivity, and there's some indication that children might have altered sensitivity to light, say, compared to older adults.
Yeah, so okay, a lot to study, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Future perspective. Thanks a lot. So here I'm back to you now. So do we know whether living in yes, so this probably joins the previous question. Yeah, yes and no. So do we know whether the living in high altitudes with long days or long nights has an impact on glycemic health, on glucose metabolism, I would say? Greetings from the 6th parallel north. Thank you for the delightful presentation. Yeah. So how are we dealing with that in high latitudes, our glycemic health?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question that I also, just as Kathryn mentioned, don't have the answer to. So I think, of course, there are a lot of data on depression in the Scandinavian countries, so that the person that is asking the question is from Sweden, and so the person should know it firsthand. I'm not sure if there's any data on glycemic values, so blood sugar levels on yeah, so I cannot answer that question. I think there is data, but I don't remember the direction of that data, whether it indicates that it goes worse or whether it's surprisingly improved. I don't recall. I would have to look that up.
Yeah, it's true. It's a great question. Maybe looking at it. Thank you, Frieder. And then one more to you, Frieder. In general, have you considered visual requirements, comfort, etc., to avoid glare by sunspots? They may bias the results.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. That's something that I actually also get to know now more, working with architects more in my research group that I'm now changed for my postdoc. So you mentioned glare. I think there was also another question on that. Of course, the view that you have from the window may also make you feel better than just facing the wall, as we had it on our artificial light condition. So that was definitely not ideal. I think in an ideal setting, we would have had also a window view, but somehow a blinding foil on the window or something like that to account for that, or a video that would be running on the wall of something similar. That is changing, because at least for the natural light people in the study, once in a while a rabbit was hopping by. So things like that happened in that condition that would never happen, of course, if you just face the wall. But participants, at least subjectively, did not complain about anything like glare. They did not complain that they were more bored or something like that with just staring against the wall, because most of the time they were reading something or watching a video or so on. And so for us, we don't have any indication that it did play a role, but we can, of course, not exclude the possibility of that.
So here is the question to both of you. Is there, and that would be the last one in life, is there any research conducted yet on lighting related to metabolism in children? Well, that we kind of tried to respond already, right? So Frieder, any comments on that? Okay.
Yes, so for metabolism, for metabolic outcomes, I would not be aware of that. I think it's a problem also of ethics, that for example, for most of the outcomes that we were looking at, you would need blood samples and so on. That is not so easy to get approval for in children, as far as I know. I know that there is work from Christian Kajochen's group in Basel that are looking at teenagers, and they at least measure saliva samples and so on, and look at how the light environment in the evening affects that in teenagers. So it is possible, but I don't think, so as to the best of my knowledge, that we have metabolic outcomes and data in children.
Yeah, thank you.
And I was going to say, the only study that I know of is a study that was done looking at mean light timing, similar to one that I showed with looking at BMI in preschool children in Australia. And they actually found a little bit the opposite. I think that there was higher BMI with morning light, but I think that might be a little bit related to how early those children were waking in order to get to preschool in that particular study.
Okay, I would like to warmly thank our both speakers. That was amazing. So Jan Frieder Harmsen from Aachen and Kathryn Reid. Yeah, your big applause, please. Kathryn Reid from the Northwestern. And I would like once again to warmly thank our organizers of these deLIGHTed talks and the audience. I mean, thanks for bearing with us until now. Nobody almost dropped off. And thank you for being so active with Q&A.